Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. This is Laurie Smith on Blog Talk Radio. It is Monday morning, 6 o'clock here in the morning, Calgary, Alberta, and I'm happy to be here. It's June 21st. I hope everybody had a great weekend and a good Father's Day. I want to talk today about emotional abuse, and I'm just having some coffee, waking up here, and I have an article. It's from the Public Health Agency of Canada. And it's really a great article regarding emotional abuse. And I wanted to look at it. We have looked at it before, but it's been a long time, and I just wanted to kind of go over it again. Emotional abuse is such a huge problem because the signs and symptoms of emotional abuse are hard to prove, especially if intervention is done and the child has been emotionally abused or psychologically abused. It's sort of one of the hardest forms of abuse to actually prove, and that's something that's common in domestic violence situations and whatnot, because physical abuse, of course, you can see the actual results of someone who's been abused physically, but emotional abuse is a lot harder to see. It's a lot harder to see the signs, a lot harder to see the symptoms. You can do it, though. There are signs and symptoms. But it's just so important that everybody sort of know about this stuff. And I also wanted to talk about it from one child abuse survivor to another and just discuss the whole issue of emotional abuse, as many people have suffered from emotional abuse in their lifetime. And I know, I am a survivor of emotional abuse, and so I just wanted to kind of go through this and sort of take a look at this article again. You can find this article at www.phac-aspc.gc.ca, and it's called Child Abuse Prevention Resources from Health Canada, and it's emotional abuse. It's information from the National Clearinghouse on Family Violence. That's where they got this actual article, and it's really, really good. So we'll go over that this morning. And we have about 30 minutes. It's a live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com. My chat room's open if anybody wants to sit in there, is awake and wants to hang out in there. And we'll just move right on with this article. I'm not a professional counselor. I don't have any counseling certificates or therapist certificates. I'm just a person, a private citizen really, who pays to do my own show because I really wanted to get some information out to people that I was finding. As I'm a student, a part-time student, actually in between courses here in Calgary, and I just continue to study all the time. So I'm just researching all the time and continuing on, even though I can't take the courses because I can't afford them. But once I get back into school, I'll continue on. But I just keep going and keep researching. And also because I'm a child abuse advocate, I stand up for children's rights against abuse, and so I'm always busy looking around. And because I'm a survivor of child abuse, I wanted other people to know that they're not alone, and that silence is such a huge problem, as many people feel so isolated because if you've been abused as a child, quite often you don't really talk to too many people. Survivors won't talk to too many people about it. It's very painful, and that's the whole issue. It's so incredibly painful. And then when you do find someone that you feel like you can trust and open up to, a lot of times, a person's just too, the fear and the guilt and the shame is just too much. So many times, like, survivors will just stay silent and they won't say anything, and they won't speak out and get any help. So that's why I wanted to do this show, in hopes that anyone who's ever survived child abuse, which I know 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 6 boys will have experienced child sexual abuse in their lifetime under the age of 18, and that's pretty much the stats all the way across the board, whether it's physical, emotional, sexual, psychological, or verbal abuse. So many of us have been abused, and so that's why it's nothing to be I don't feel like I shouldn't talk about it. I really feel like we all need to talk about it, and that's the whole issue, because abuse is just swept under the carpet. And no one wants to talk about it. No one wants to deal with it, and we have to deal with it. And I really believe that survivors of child abuse really deserve to have a good life, even more so than other people, I think. Because if you grew up abused, then you certainly do have the right to have a good life as an adult. And so many times we just see people who have been abused suffer on as adults, and I know and have known in my lifetime many people who've done that. So that's the whole issue, including myself. So that's why I always say for people, just to reach out and get some help wherever you can find it. Whether it's a counselor, a therapist, the group support, online group support, peer support, mentors, child abuse survivor groups. Just make sure you do reach out and get some help, and not to suffer forever in silence and just in misery and pain. I think that's just horrible. It's bad enough to suffer abuse as a child, and then to go on to live these lives, these sad, lonely lives, with all of this stuff inside you. I think it's very sad, and also you can have a healthy life, and I've seen too many survivors do it, and that's the whole issue. You start taking a look around at some of these websites out here, and where survivors have actually made it, and now they're making it their business to help other people, right? And if you just start looking around, you can see all these great websites out there for people who just like us, who need some support and just need some help. So make sure you do reach out and get some help. So important. So also, let's if you're under the age of 18, I just ask that you have someone okay it, that you can listen to all my shows, because my shows are ultimately for children to stop child abuse. But the whole issue is I don't know how young the children are listening to the shows, because I don't know where the Blog Talk players are anymore. And so I just ask that young people under the age of 18 would get someone to listen to my shows with you, just even an archive show. And that way they can tell you whether or not you should be listening to it, and also sort of help you with questions if you have questions and whatnot. Abuse is just not a subject that's talked about too much, except for what we see in the paper. And, in the paper we see lots of headlines, which is very sad, about all these children who lose their lives, at the hands of a parent or caregiver, or are in the hospital due to abuse-related injuries. And so that's about all we ever hear about abuse. We don't ever hear about the aftermath, the effects of abuse and whatnot. And so it could be kind of scary for some young people who have never heard about it. They might not understand what I'm talking about. And you might think, if you've never heard about it, you might think, well, what is that, and how come that happens? And so you might want to have an older person or an adult, someone you trust, listen to the show with you, and then they can help you, with questions if you have questions, and find the answers, right? And so we'll just get right into this article. It's emotional abuse from the National Clearinghouse on Family Violence, and www.phac-aspc.gc.ca. And what is emotional abuse? It says, I'm just reading right from the page. You can pull this up and look at it. Emotional abuse is horrible. I suffered with emotional abuse. We all did, everyone in our family, and it was extremely hard and worse than the physical abuse by far, except for the physical abuse, that can kill you, right, which, I have experienced that as well. The emotional abuse tends to stay with you, it's very, very hard. It says here, what is emotional abuse? There is no universal accepted definition of emotional abuse. Like other forms of violence in relationships, emotional abuse is based on power and control. And the following are widely recognized as forms of emotional abuse. And they list off all the different types of the actual actions of emotional abuse, like rejecting, degrading, terrorizing, isolating, corrupting and exploiting, denying emotional responsiveness, and we'll go through those. Rejecting is refusing to acknowledge a person's presence, value, or worth. Communicating to a person that she or he is useless or inferior. Devaluing her or his thoughts and feelings. For example, repeatedly treating a child differently from siblings in a way that suggests resentment, rejection, or dislike for the child. And I experienced that myself. Degrading, insulting, ridiculing, name-calling, intimidating, and infantilizing behavior which diminishes the identity, dignity, and self-worth of the person. Examples of this are yelling, swearing, publicly humiliating, or labeling a person as stupid, mimicking a person's disability, treating a senior as if she or he cannot make decisions. This just very, very sad. I've experienced that, and I know what that's like on a daily basis. To grow up around that stuff, and it's extremely damaging. Terrorizing, including terror or extreme fear in a person, or inducing terror or extreme fear in a person, coercing by intimidation, placing or threatening to place a person in an unfit or dangerous environment. Examples: forcing a child to watch violent acts towards other family members or pets, threatening to leave, physically hurt or kill a person, pets or people that he or she cares about, threatening to destroy a person's possessions, threatening to have a person deported or put in an institution, and stalking. So that's all under terrorizing. And isolating, physical confinement, restricting normal contact with others, limiting freedom within a person's own environment. For example, excluding a senior from participating in decisions about his or her own life, locking a child in a closet or room alone, refusing a female partner or senior access to her or his own money and financial affairs, withholding contact with grandchildren, depriving a person of mobility, aids, or transportation. So these are not just for like abuse towards children. Like anyone can be an abuser, and people. There's a whole issue regarding abuse against elders, the elderly people, abuse against handicapped people, people with disabilities, and whatnot. And then children, of course, are at huge risk because they cannot protect themselves. Actually, none of those people can. They're all very vulnerable. They're the vulnerable, sectors of society, right? And they sadly, quite often suffer from emotional abuse, but it's so hard to prove. It's really hard to prove that someone's doing these types of things to people, right? And so, but it happens, and that's the sad thing, right? And it's incredibly sad. Corrupting, exploiting, socializing a person into accepting ideas or behavior which oppose legal standards, using a person for advantage or profit, training a child to serve the interests of the abuser and not the child. For example, child sexual abuse, permitting a child to use alcohol or drugs, enticing a person into the sex trade. So those are examples of corrupting or exploiting. And denying emotional responsiveness, that's failing to provide care in a sensitive and responsive manner, being detached and uninvolved, interacting only when necessary, ignoring a person's mental health needs, for example, ignoring a child's attempt to interact, failing to show affection, care, or love for a child, treating a senior who lives in an institution as though he or she is an object or just a job to be done. Emotional abuse accompanies other forms of abuse, but also may occur on its own. And it says here, no abuse, neglect, physical, sexual, or financial, can occur without psychological consequences. Therefore, all abuse contains elements of emotional abuse. Yeah, it's really hard. You can't, if a child's been, or anyone who's been physically abused and sexually abused and whatnot, there's always going to be emotional and psychological damage done because of that. So there will be emotional abuse along with all the other types of abuse, right? But it's hard to prove the emotional abuse. It's just much easier to prove because of the signs and symptoms, the physical abuse, and also the, if a child sexual abuse, right? Because the signs and symptoms are there. But emotional abuse, unless you actually catch someone doing it, and treating someone bad, by doing these things to them, rejecting them, isolating them, terrorizing them, unless you catch them doing that, it'd be hard to prove that. But you can tell by the way that people react, and there are signs and symptoms of it. So it says emotional abuse follows a pattern. It is repeated and sustained. If left unchecked, abuse does not get better over time. It only gets worse. And like other forms of violence in relationships, those who hold the least power and resources in society, for example, women and children, are most often emotionally abused. Emotional abuse can severely damage a person's sense of self-worth and perception. In children, emotional abuse can impair psychological development, including intelligence, memory, recognition, perception, attention, imagination, and moral development. Emotional abuse can also affect a child's social development and may result in an impaired ability to perceive, feel, or understand and express emotions. And so this is it's so incredibly damaging, and people don't realize that. They think, well, if a child was not physically abused, then they're not abused, or if they're not sexually abused, then there's no abuse. But the emotional abuse is actually what stays with you, and the psychological damage that's done stays with us to adulthood, and that we have to, if we haven't gotten any help with it, we have to work through it. And it's really very hard, and that's, there's so many people that suffer with this, you know what I mean, and that's the problem. And a lot of people, if they don't reach out and get help, which I didn't do until I was about 41 years old, it's very hard on a person, absolutely, because the physical abuse ended so many years ago, you know what I mean, and so did the verbal abuse and whatnot, right? But the thing is it carries on, and it just continues on inside of us, until we actually can make some sense of it and get it out and look at it and get some help, to overcome it. And so that's the sad part. And even, women and men who have been abused in domestic violence situations, domestic abuse, quite often they are emotional. Well, they would have emotional abuse, right? It goes along with everything else, all the violence and the terrorizing and the isolating and the controlling and, all of that stuff it's the bigger part of the abuse. Unless the physical violence kills the other person, of course that would be the bigger, serious form of abuse. But the aftermath of emotional abuse is so hard on people, and that's why I'm just one more person to say, I hope everybody will reach out, and no matter which way they can, to get some help, because we don't deserve to suffer along as adults, after being abused as children. It's just ridiculous to have to suffer your whole entire lifetime with something that was not even your fault in the first place, and that's the whole issue. I just started figuring that stuff out about 3 years ago, so I wish I would have gotten some help a long time ago. And it says, how widespread is emotional abuse? And they say here, only a few studies provide insight about the prevalence of emotional abuse in Canada. And emotional abuse is difficult to research because, in comparison to other forms of abuse, its effects have only recently been recognized. And there are no consistent definitions, and it is hard to define. It is difficult to detect, assess, and substantiate, and many cases of emotional abuse go unreported. Oh, we know that, you know what I mean? Abuse is underreported, period. And this is kind of interesting stuff here. A recent study of Ontario investigations into child maltreatment found that in 1993, 10% of investigations alleged emotional abuse. In 1993, this is some older stuff, but 39% of women in abusive relationships reported their children that their children saw them being assaulted. That's almost 40% of women in abusive relationships said that their children actually saw the assaults happening. In 1995, the Canadian Women's Health Test found that out of 1,000 women 15 years of age or older or over, 36% had experienced emotional abuse while growing up. Wow, so out of 1,000 women of 15 years of age and older, 40% had experienced emotional abuse while growing up, 36%. 43% had experienced some form of abuse as children or teenagers, and 39% reported experiencing verbal, emotional abuse in a relationship within the last 5 years. So those are really high numbers, and this is old information, so the statistics would definitely be different. There would be actually abuse is kind of being more reported lately. So we don't know, I've looked into it, and they don't really know if there's just more abuse or if it's just the fact that more of it is being caught, more of it's being reported. And that's good. That's what we want. You know what I mean? So, but so the statistics are changing like all the time. But it's just interesting to see that, the studies that have been done. I do a lot of looking into it because of the work that I do. And we're always looking for really current and up-to-date stats. And so, but even the old information is kind of interesting to look at. And I'll just say, facts to consider here. Emotional abuse of children can result in serious emotional and or behavioral problems, including depression, lack of attachment or emotional bond to a parent or guardian, low cognitive ability and educational achievement, and poor social skills. And I mean, and who's to wonder why? I mean, when children grow up around emotional abuse and domestic violence and whatnot, they are, of course, probably going to have behavioral problems. You know what I mean? Especially if one or both parents are constantly abusing them emotionally, it's very, very hard on children. So they obviously don't learn at the same rate as other children quite often. They don't have the same social skills that another child would have who's growing up in a really positive environment with lots of love and care. Of course, these children are going to suffer, and it will change the way that they see life and the way that they see themselves. They'll be different compared to the other children. I knew when I was growing up that I was different from the other children because, and the other children in my school always treated me a little bit differently too. And looking back, I kind of think that it's strange. You know what I mean? It's very, very strange. And how kids actually kind of know these things without even having to say anything. So it's sort of funny. And so it is quite interesting to check into this stuff. I know so many people who have experienced emotional abuse. They would you would definitely know what I'm talking about. But it says one study which looked at emotionally abused children in infancy and then again during their preschool years consistently found them to be angry, uncooperative, and unattached to their primary caregiver. And the children also lacked creativity, persistence, and enthusiasm. Children who experience rejection are more likely than accepted children to exhibit hostility, aggressive or passive-aggressive behavior, and to be extremely dependent and to have negative opinions of themselves and their abilities, to be emotionally unstable or unresponsive, and to have a negative perception of the world around them. So that's just the case, if you grow up around that stuff, you probably do have some anger and some hostility and sort of a sense of self-worthlessness, maybe negative perception of the world around them, and that would just be normal. You know what I mean? Because they wouldn't develop this view that life is good and that because I know personally growing up with that being told called names lots of times bad names and being told that I was stupid and that I was ugly and that I was just worthless and wasn't wanted. I was actually told I wasn't wanted quite a bit. And that was very painful as a child growing up, because you're looking for that acceptance, and that love, from your caregivers, from your parents or your caregivers and your family, right? And that's where you would want that to happen, right? Not out on the streets or with some strangers. I mean, this is your parents or this is your caregivers and people who are supposed to look after you and care about you, and so it's just so sad that when children grow up like that, then they quite often feel that they are not worth anything and that their lives just don't matter and it doesn't matter what they do or it won't ever be right, you know what I mean, or it won't ever be worth anything, you know what I mean, and so. It's very, very sad and damaging, and I wish parents would really pay more attention to what they tell their children and what they say to their children. You can't treat your children badly and then expect them to have a good life and to be able to help you out as an aging parent. There's a lot of elderly people out there that cry the blues because they're like, well, my children don't love me and they don't respect me and they don't look after me and stuff, and you just got to wonder how they treated their children when they were younger, because kids, loving families always look after each other. That's a fact. Even though some might go off on their merry way to have their own careers and their own lives, they would still be there emotionally for the family. And so some of these seniors that you see that, complain, oh, my kids, they just don't ever do anything for me and they don't love me and stuff. You have to wonder how they treated their children. Because I can't imagine why children who had grown up in a loving home, most children, I'm not saying every single person, but I'm saying on average, children who have grown up in these lovely homes, being brought up properly, and the parents just trying to help them out in any way that they can. And then, they continue this awesome relationship throughout their lives, and then the parents, get older and they need help. It just seems natural that the children would want to help their parents and be happy to do it because they were there for them. But, no child, who's been abused, really deserves to have to continue to put up with abuse even from an elderly parent. You know what I mean? And that's the whole issue, right? And a lot of times, people in society don't see that because if the abuse wasn't reported. Now, in our case, the abuse was reported, so we do have documentation. But the whole issue is sometimes there isn't any documentation, and so everybody's like, look how that person treats their aging parents, and then because the aging parents are old and cute now, and they're sitting around going, oh, I'm so old and I'm cute, and I loved my kids, and look what they do to me, and look how they treat me, and you got to wonder just how much of that is true and how much of that is false, because people are liars and people are very manipulative. Abusers are very manipulative because that's how they get to do what they do and still remain looking great to society, right? And that's the huge problem with abuse, right? Anyone who studies and understands the whole situation behind abusers will find that they're very manipulative. They know how to manipulate people, and that's why they get to do what they do, to abuse children, right? So that's the whole issue. I just think that parents should watch what they're doing, and take good care of their children. And then their children can take good care of them when they get older, right? And it's just a cycle. That way, the family, the whole healthy family cycle starts to begin to grow, because that's the whole issue with society today. It's so messed up, you know what I mean? And it's like, how do you fix that? The only way to fix it is to start with this generation, right? And really start with our own families, And if you are a parent, make sure that you have your children's best interests at heart at all times. But that doesn't mean being their best friend and spoiling them and not teaching them anything. It just means that, there's that bond there, first of all, that bond that they know that you love and care for them, and that you will protect them and do what you can to help them. And also that you would teach them how to behave properly, and that's through proper teaching, right? Doesn't have to be beaten into a child, right? Because that won't get you anywhere. Physical violence doesn't teach anybody anything but how to be physically violent. You know what I mean? Emotional abuse doesn't teach anybody anything except for how to be emotionally abusive. See, parents think that by disciplining their children that they're teaching them a lesson, but what they're doing is, yes, they are teaching them a lesson. They're teaching them how to be abusers when they grow up. And it's really unfortunate because it's what you do to your child will probably do to their own children. And so, if you beat your children, they will probably beat their children, or they'll beat up other people. If you yell and scream and call your children names, they'll either revert and fall back and they'll feel worthless, or they'll go out and violently, verbally assault people. So this is the whole issue, right? What you teach your children, that's what they're going to take with them. And so, you want to be very, very careful how you handle, the situations with your children. And when they are misbehaving, there's definitely way better ways to handle it than abusing them. You know what I mean? And so, because abuse just doesn't help anybody, and it's just cycle that continues on and on. It just keeps going. So that's the whole issue. It's just absolutely horrible. And it says here, parental verbal aggression, for example, yelling, insulting, or symbolic aggression like slamming a door, giving the silent treatment toward children can have serious consequences. Children who experience these forms of abuse demonstrate higher rates of physical aggressiveness, delinquency, and interpersonal problems than other children. And children whose parents are additionally physically abusive are even more likely to experience such difficulties. And that's my story right there. You know what I mean? There was physical abuse as well as a lot of verbal, emotional, psychological abuse as well. And, it just went on year after year after year. And then people would be like, what's the matter with her? How come she can't behave like other children? And then I'd be kind of ridiculed for that. And I was like, well, if because we were not removed from the home, see, so that's the problem. We were left in the home. That the courts knew about the abuse, but we were left in the home, and so it just continued on and on and on. So that's the whole issue. It's very damaging, and we'll continue on looking at this tomorrow morning. We have a couple minutes left, but higher rates of physical aggressiveness, delinquency, and interpersonal problems. If parents are calling their children names and slamming doors and giving them a silent treatment, stuff like that. I mean, we experienced all of that, all of my siblings, and as physical abuse as well in there. So when your parent is physically abusing you and beating you, and also cursing you pretty much on a daily basis, it will definitely have an effect on a child. And it will definitely, cause lots of problems later on if they actually survive, right? And so that's the whole issue. It is extremely bad, and that's why I'm doing what I do. I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and I'm so happy to be, let me tell you, a volunteer position that I love dearly. Check our website out, www.dreamcatchersforabusedchildren.com, and you can also listen in on the Talk Radio, Dreamcatchers Talk Radio here on Blog Talk Radio, which is www.blogtalkradio.com/Dreamcatchers. And you can catch us tonight. Elizabeth Roberts Brawley, Southern Regional Director, will be on with myself. And we'll be on at 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time for an hour. And I hope you will check our website out and take a look at some of the great things that's going on. And pass the word on to people. This is all about promoting awareness, education, and prevention of child abuse. It is primary prevention is what it is, which is the most important type of prevention because it helps stop child abuse before it happens. Secondary, tertiary is also very important because we know children are being abused, but primary prevention is the absolute number one way to stop child abuse, and that is what we do, and that's by providing education, promoting awareness, education, and prevention of child. So please pass our website on to everybody that you know. Check in to see what's happening. All the website is updated on a daily basis, every day. So please check it out. And have a great day, everyone. We'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.